even if I'm in a world where I don't have to fuck for free because all my needs are met, men will push me and pressure me to fuck for free because misogyny exists.
Welcome to On The Whorizon, powered by SexWorkCEO.
A podcast about what's on the horizon for sex workers and how to navigate it, hosted by Jessie Sage and MelRose Michaels. Who misses free and affordable ads and social networks without the anti-sex work rhetoric?
Assembly 4 is a team of sex workers and technologists from Melbourne, Australia, aiming to bring back free and fair advertising and social spaces to the sex work community.
They also give back to organizations based in harm reduction, sex work, and education.
Stepping away from the clunky design of traditional platforms, their two products, Tris.link and Switter.at, are refreshing and well-needed changes in both presentation and mission.
Both are free to join and open to all. In the words of an A4 user, from the policies to the language to the advice and tips, it makes such a big difference to feel encouraged and supported instead of policed.
Check out their website, assembly4.com, for the word, not the number, for more info. Okay. Sex work, episode 6, sex work and the revolution. I want to define for people that are tuning in that may have no idea what we're talking about. And we do this a little in the episode, but maybe we should start with it and lead with it.
Yeah. Okay. So let me first put my cards on the table and say that this episode was kind of a little pet project of mine that I really wanted to have. And here's why. Because every 2 or 3 months, no, maybe a little bit longer than that, but it is very often, we on leftist / sex work Twitter have tons of people who are talking about whether there's going to be sex work after the revolution or not, which makes me crazy. This argument makes me crazy. So I wanted to bring on people who I thought could talk a little bit about it. And I think it's actually appropriate to put this at the end of the first 5 episodes that we did, because we're talking about the political and social landscape that we find ourselves in. And there's a lot of problems with that.
Yeah.
Our system is fucked, and it's fucked for sex workers in particular. So I totally understand the sentiment of we gotta turn this shit upside down.
Yes, let's revolt. Let's
revolt. We need a workers' revolt. Yes, we do. And we're seeing some of that right now, actually, because of COVID. And I think that there's a lot of people who are just you know what? Fuck that job. I'm not going. This is ridiculous. And I think that I totally get that sentiment, and it speaks to my heart because I don't know, I dropped out of the workforce and became a whore. So I get it, but what I keep hearing and so that's one part of it. And then the other part of it is that we tend to, when we're talking about anti-sex work and anti-sex work rhetoric, we tend to think of anti-sex work feminists, and we tend to think of religious conservatives.
Yeah.
What we don't tend to think about is leftists. And it's hard for me to wrap my head around why leftists are also anti-sex work.
Yeah. Or how they can be.
Yeah. When it's coming from to be frank, it's hard for me to understand why feminists are against it too, but that's a whole other discussion. So, I think that, to hear it coming from all directions, one of which is I think there's tons and tons of sex workers who are fuck work. And yet, and we're going to do things our way, and we're not going to participate in
mainstream economy
the way everyone else does. That it is. And so to me, it just seems, I don't know, how should I say this? It's hard for me. This is why I want to do this episode. It seems like every time I see this, I'm wait, what?
Yeah.
What are they talking about? So the revolution, going back to Melrose's question, I don't know if the revolution is ever going to come, but what leftists tend to be talking about within the context of Marxism and the history of Marxism is the time in which like the capitalist system is overturned, the time in which we turn that all upside down and have a workers' revolt and change the structure of our economy, of our labor force, of the way that we put together families, of everything, where we just turn the system upside down. I'm all for turning the system upside down. What I wonder is like, wait, but why are the sex workers going to do so good?
Yeah. Where do you think we're going?
Where are we going? I would like to have sex in the revolution, and I'd also like to, be able to support myself. So I don't know. But and I think that the biggest like question for me about that is it seems to presuppose that like sex work is a product of capitalism. So if we overturn the capitalist system, nobody is going to be in need, and therefore nobody's going to be doing sex work. That seems just like patently silly to me because like, going back to the very first episode we did when we talked to Caitlin Bailey talks about the sex workers that existed in ancient Greece and Rome, that existed 10,000 years ago.
Long before capitalism.
And so I think I just wanted to play with that, see what we could have, see what is going on here. Why are people having those conversations? So we have Juniper Fitzgerald on, who's I think former sex worker and professor, and has, spent a lot of time, and a sociologist. And it's, I think, interesting to have on a sociologist to talk about what kind of forces and what kind of like political sentiments create these ideas. Yes. And then we also have on Phoenix Kalita, who I love both of these guests. I love all the guests that we've had, but Phoenix Kalita is one of the directors of Swap USA, also considers themselves a leftist, and has a lot to say about sex work
and the revolution.
After the revolution. So
I want to ask you, so do you think there will be a revolution, point blank? Like, do you think that is going to happen in terms of sex work specifically, not just capitalism? Because the empire is falling. So, let's leave that piece out. But for sex workers, do you think there's going to be a revolution?
Well, what would that even mean for sex workers? I mean, I think that's maybe the question. So do I think
we both agree that sex work will exist no matter how this pans out. It will still be here, right? Sex work would exist
without money. I mean, there was this experiment that took place where these scientists like trained monkeys to like exchange things, and once they taught the monkeys, excuse me, this is not a very precise story, but once they taught the monkeys like how to exchange like sticks for something else or whatever, the first thing that happened is a boy monkey gave a girl monkey whatever they were using for currency, and the girl had sex with him. That's what happened. Sounds familiar.
It's funny how that, wow.
Yeah, and so I think that it's really like we don't even need our currency system for us to recognize that like sex itself is a currency, and there are lots of uses for sex. And that's what I think is also kind of interesting about this is it assumes that somehow sex is going to be this one very specific thing. And I think that we as sex workers know that sex meets a lot of needs. And so
I think people like fail to realize that the average person too isn't super comfortable having conversations around sex with even their own partner.
Right.
So like if you have a partner that you can't open up to about maybe something you think is so outside the realm of normal in your perspective, that why does that somehow not mean that you aren't going to reach out to a sex worker to fulfill that need or to experiment in that place that you're curious about? Like there's still a demand there.
Right. And I think that, I like criticize my baby sex worker self because I think when I first got into this, and this, I'm going to be kind of embarrassed telling this story, but I did a lot of phone sex earlier in my career. And when you're a phone sex operator, people call you and they tell you their secrets. And I would hear all kinds of things. And I remember at the very beginning of my career being like, asking my clients like, well, have you talked to your wife about this? And they'll be like, no, my wife doesn't know I want this. And I would feel sad for them. Like, it's too bad that you don't have like a relationship in which you're open with your partner. After years of doing this, I don't feel sad for them anymore, because I've come to recognize that like maybe that thing that they want, they don't actually want in this relationship with somebody that they're like so involved in. And that doesn't mean that they necessarily feel shame, although many clients do feel shame, but that's not, it doesn't necessarily mean that. It might just mean that like it doesn't make sense in that relationship, or they care so much about their spouse that like they care what their spouse thinks. I think that the average client who calls a phone sex line, who calls me on my phone sex line, doesn't care if I think that his kink is strange whatever. And that's not to say that like he doesn't care about me, but I think that's the place that I hold. Like, you know, and I think that we don't always want to bring some, you know,
dynamic home with us.
You know, here's an example. I remember one time I had a spanking fetish client, and he wanted to be spanked every Friday after work. And when I asked him, like, well, have you ever asked your wife to spank you? And his response was no, and not because he thinks she'd say no, but he thinks she'd say yes. And he knows that she wouldn't be into it. And he didn't want to put her in a position to have to do something for him
that she didn't find pleasurable or.
And I was like, that makes a lot of sense.
It does make a lot of sense. You know, it's funny. I was smiling when you were going into a discussion. For the people watching the video version of this, it's not from what Jessie was saying at all. But I was thinking about even my own husband. Like when we've had sexual encounters, I hope he does listen to this podcast, because I think he'll be like, what did you say? But one of the things, like, I'll be like, you know, let's have like rough sex or let's do this. He's like, I can't disrespect you. Like I have a really hard like time talking down to you or disrespecting you. He's like, I can't do it.
There's something about like our very intimate relationships that like you play certain roles for each other. And maybe it's like impossible to break out of that role, or not impossible, but maybe you just don't even want to.
It's just not warranted. It's not what you want in your household, I guess.
Yeah. And I think that's fair. And I think that sexuality is complicated. So this is like a very roundabout way of saying, you know, sex is more complicated than just like, we're going to be liberated and we're not going to need money. So therefore
there won't be sex workers.
There won't be sex workers because I don't know, like
because all of our needs are met, like our financial, health care, all of these things are met.
I don't know, but like, is the government going to supply
your hookers?
But then there has to be hookers. So I don't know. I would like to live in a world in which, like, you know, insurance, like I could take insurance for, you know, being a hooker. That would be great. But,
or my health insurance did cover my STD testing every 2 weeks when I need to film. Yeah, that'd be great. I'd love that.
Great. But no, I mean, you asked, do I think the revolution is going to come? We didn't even talk about that, but I don't know. I do think that we're at a moment, like we're at a historical moment when people are really, really questioning the labor movement that we have now. I think that there were generations that came before us, the boomers, for example, who really benefited from the work structure and who had pensions and who had retirements and Social Security. That's all dwindling. People have no job security. You know, my in-laws have both had 2 jobs in their whole life, and that's mind-boggling to me. Like,
I broke my brain. Like, no, how?
Yeah, I mean, this is just a different world. We're living in a different world where, like, we just don't have that security. So do I think that there will be like a reckoning at some point? Do I think we're going to completely abolish capitalism? I don't know. Like you said, I think that like our whole empire is kind of falling. So I don't know what's going to come after that. But all that being said, I still think there'll be sex work, whatever happens.
Yeah, I think the oldest profession will remain the oldest profession, and also one that's not going to go anywhere. But
but it's still interesting to debate. So we talked to Juniper and Phoenix, and they shared their opinions about this, and it was a fun conversation. So I hope you enjoy it.
Yeah, let's get to them. Juniper is first and foremost a mother. She's written extensively on the intersection of motherhood and sex work and considers herself an anti-capitalist. She holds a PhD, but please don't hold that against her. Hello, Juniper, and welcome to the show. We're really happy to have you.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah,
absolutely.
We're excited to talk to you.
Absolutely. Can you introduce yourself for anyone who might not be as familiar with you as we are?
Sure. I'm Juniper Fitzgerald. I wrote the first and I think only children's book to portray a sex working mother. I have been in the sex industry for 20 years. I also hold a PhD in sociology. And I'm a mom, of course. That's my most salient identity.
Yeah. Yeah. What's the name of your children's book?
How Mamas Love Their Babies. So please buy a copy and send it to Cardi B.
That's a good idea. Oh, and your book. When is your book coming out?
My memoir is coming out next summer. I'm very excited. Summer of 2022.
Nice. Okay, so we had you on today because we wanted to talk a little bit about like attitudes about sex work coming out of leftist circles. So we've talked a lot in the podcast already about like feminists and conservatives and the government, but also there's a lot of pushback against sex workers from leftist circles too. So I was wondering if you wanted to like speak a little bit about that.
I would love to speak about that. It's kind of the bane of my existence to see, I call them baby commies on Twitter. Baby commies on Twitter.com, lampooning the sex industry of all things. This industry that houses a lot of marginalized people. And I think what's most concerning to me is the kind of heightened focus. We see this with like second wave feminists as well. Like, why this heightened focus on the sex industry? Like, I highly doubt that any form of labor that we see under capitalism would exist after the revolution. This kind of like nebulous thing that people gesture towards. I don't even know what the revolution is. And I think that a lot of people like, I was thinking about this last night as I was thinking about coming on the podcast, but I lived in a post-communist country, and it's, people don't understand that communism, as we have seen it play out in contemporary society, has been just as oppressive as the regimes that we as leftists claim to fight against. And so I get concerned that baby commies on Twitter.com have not experienced the wrath of like contemporary communism. And I know that in leftist, like communist spaces, we have conversations about how most contemporary societies that are communist regimes are not the kind of regimes that, for example, Marx was talking about. So I definitely get that. But this idea that sex work wouldn't exist post-revolution is it's such an abstract thing to say. And I think it's a dog whistle, like unmistakably a dog whistle for, I think sex workers are gross.
Yeah. It does feel like that. It feels like a it's not only anti-sex worker, it almost feels anti-sex. Like I can't really wrap my head around what exactly is going on in that like attitude.
And I'm okay with anti-sex. I'm pretty anti-sex these days, but I think, what I always think about is I teach sociology, and under the communist regime in what was formerly called Czechoslovakia, sociology was outlawed. So whenever I see baby commies asking stuff like, would your job exist post-revolution? It's like, actually, no. My discipline would be outlawed. So it's not like this heightened focus on sex work is concerning to me. And it's the same way that these repressive regimes like the alt-right, kind of obsess over the labor of sex workers, and not even the labor, the like identity of sex workers. And so I think that's, and I don't see these leftists using the same lens to analyze any other form of labor. Like there's a lot of forms of labor that suck. The sex industry is super diverse. A lot of people feel great in their work. I can't say that that's necessarily my experience with sex work. I think people who do have that experience are valid. But I get to say, like, I've engaged in shitty labor in a lot of different labor sectors, and I still deserve labor rights. And if we think about, again, any other form of shitty labor, the leftist position is to support those laborers and demand labor rights in service to this nebulous abstract revolution. And I don't know why the same wouldn't be true for sex workers.
Yeah.
Right. Mm-hmm. Yeah, so that's like a really good point. Like for a group of people who feel like they're who feel like one of the central like tenets is to support workers and to make their working conditions better. Why do you think that sex work is like excluded from that?
I see a lot of people using quotes from Marx, inaccurately, mind you, about how referring to like oppressed people as the prostitutes of society, essentially. And I mean, it's wild to me that you would kind of pick and choose that quote as a leftist, because Marx was like, I mean, fuck, man, he wrote in the 1800s he was fucking his best friend's wife. Like, it's not like he was the most upstanding guy. And we have much more nuance. You know, when Marx was writing, labor looked a lot different. It really was this kind of two-tiered class society. And I think that social class is a lot more complex in late capitalism. And we have very smart people speaking to the nuance of the sex industry under late capitalism. So I'm not sure why these leftists would choose that one quote from the 1800s from a dead white guy when there's so much better work.
Right, right. Yeah. We're like, I mean, it does seem like kind of a misuse of theory, and it also seems like they're trying to apply something that like is no longer relevant, like in the sense that like Marx was speaking to a very specific like dynamic, labor dynamic in a very specific culture that like doesn't resemble the one that we have now, or at least like by and large doesn't. There may be slivers of that in places, but it's not like most people's experience. So I'm curious, like, why you think they are like picking out like sex work in particular to be this like to focus on, I guess, is the question.
For the same reason that the alt-right is. I think about this obsession with, and you know, some of these like so-called Marxist and baby commies on twitter.com are also TERFs, you know, and I think that is a really important thing to acknowledge, that most of the time when people are anti-sex work, they're also really transphobic. And I think that's because they have a very essentialist worldview about gender, femininity in particular. And even though they claim to be leftist, they're still adopting these very traditional essentialist ideas of white womanhood. I mean, it's a white supremacist conception of what womanhood should be. And I think that any kind of diversion from that essentialist notion is an attack on their core values.
Yeah. I'm curious, how do you think sex work should be imagined within the framework of leftist and labor politics?
That's a really amazing question. Do you mean like in contemporary politics, or how do I imagine it after the revolution?
I would say first in the current landscape of how things are structured. And then, I mean, I don't think any of us on this episode believe there's a revolution coming, but we can pretend and talk about what that could look like. We could go there.
For sure.
Like, I'm actually not like anti-left. I just like this particular conversation is one that I can't wrap my head around.
Yeah,
like
this piece of it.
Yeah, this piece of it is something I just can't wrap my head around why people are holding on to. Yeah.
Well, I think people need hope. If I have enough alcohol in me, I definitely will blabber on and on about the revolution. But I probably share your sentiments that it might not ever happen. I mean, we haven't seen one yet. But in any case, to first answer your question about how sex work should be imagined in contemporary political landscape, I mean, I was thinking about, I read that horrible Catherine McKinnon piece, the op-ed for the New York Times. And it's like, not that this is a perfect analogy at all, but the feminist movement, by and large, no matter what wave we're talking about, allows for complexity in conversations about abortion. Some people have a really hard time with choosing to terminate a pregnancy, and some people are like, fuck yes, this saved my life. I am in the latter camp of that. I had an abortion that I thank the universe for every day. But why are we not allowing that nuance and complex? Like, I think about how we talk about pregnant people in the feminist movement and how it's a really hard choice. And just because it's a really hard choice doesn't mean that you 100% lack agency. It's like we're all navigating bodies and overarching social structures and our interpersonal lives. And like, we can afford that same complexity to sex workers. We can make room for people who are like, sex work was fucking horrible for me. If I had had more labor rights, it probably wouldn't have been so shitty. As well as people who are like, sex work saved my life. And allowing for, I mean, you were talking about how a lot of trans folks are in the sex industry. I mean, think about how many straight jobs can legally deny different marginalized people employment. That's a material reality. The material reality is that some people would not be able to survive without sex work. And whether sex work exists because of patriarchy or not, I mean, it seems like a moot point, a moot question. Like, my labor as a barista existed under patriarchy as well. Like, I don't even know what we're trying to get at by taking the material experiences that people have and trying to theorize about them. You know, it seems like you know, it's like an incompatible, it's just a disingenuous argument.
I think that's right, because what do you get from that? So we do live in the material world that we live in. We do have the particular constraints that we have. We do have people who are denied employment for myriad reasons, like
anything, just disability, color of your skin, just rattle anything off, really.
Gender identity, but but
tattoos.
Having a prostitution charge, I mean,
exactly.
Right. And then what, you know? And so those are already a reality. So, you know, I think
the agency piece that you brought up is really interesting as well, because when you talk about agency and I guess that kind of leads into autonomy as well. But if I am of age and of mental capacity to make decisions about joining the military or drinking alcohol or buying cigarettes or purchasing drugs, whatever, and depending where you live, like, why does that get cut off when it's just something everyone else doesn't agree with? I don't see how that fits progress or where we want to see things go, or even their own agenda, essentially. It's a disservice.
Yeah, I mean, I wrote a piece for Tits and Sass years ago about how choice is constrained. Like, I think we can have a theoretical and macro understanding of how our individual choices always influence other people. Like, I don't want to suggest that we all just get to make these individual choices and that it's nobody else's business. I'm very critical of this idea of my body, my choice. In any movement, you know, the alt-right has adopted that now, which, wow, like, what twilight zone are we living in? But exactly. Like, when it comes to, like, even consumption, like, every time that I buy stuff for my sex work, I think about how these things are often made in the sweatshops of the global South by usually women who are getting paid shit. And so, I mean, we can have an awareness of the ways that we all participate, perhaps unwittingly, in this fucked up system, but we all also have to navigate that. Like, that would be true. That's true of an academic in academia. That's true of a barista. That's true of the sex industry. And we often, without thought, allow that nuance and complexity for other laborers. It's just in the sex industry that we don't.
Yeah. Why do you think that is? Why do you think that the sex industry is the only industry that we aren't allowed to have those nuanced discussions? Or, I mean, we do as sex workers, but outside of us, that's not happening.
You know, I think when I listen to the rhetoric of second wave feminists, usually straight and cis, usually white, second wave feminists, I I mean, I always get this like jealous partner vibe, and I know that that's really simplifying things, but it's like, there's a kind of maintenance of like monogamy and heterosexuality, I think, at the root of those arguments, and a fear that sex workers will, and that goes back to patriarchy, a fear that sex workers are going to disrupt, married women's access to resources. And it's like, you don't have to live like that. Join us.
Yeah. You're welcome here.
I was thinking so much about that the other day, and I even like had a conversation with PJ, and I was like, because we were talking about like the political climate around sex work, and I was like, wait, is all of this just about women not wanting us to fuck their husbands? Like, is that what we're talking about? Is that the underbelly of this?
That was like my favorite tweet when everyone with Layla, or when they outlawed OnlyFans, like, fine, we're going to the streets, we're fucking all your husbands. I was like, oh, you did it.
And he, of course, was like, oh, I think it's more complicated than that.
Of course.
Blah, blah, blah. Gave like a very long explanation that I honestly can't remember right now. But I remember having the conversation. And there does seem to be like an element of that like sex workers are a threat in some way. And maybe it's not that you're going to fuck my husband, but somehow it's like a threat to not only like, I don't know, to the social order, to them, to like, to everybody.
It makes me almost wonder too if it plays into just the societal norms that get built into women to be competitive and to these like social.
I don't know. It's really like foreign to me. And it's foreign to me, I think, because I do this work and I think like, I'm not much of a threat.
Yeah. We have different perspectives.
Yeah. Like I have my own, I don't want any of your husbands.
Yeah.
This quote, have you read All the Lives I Want by Elena Macy?
No.
She has this great line where, she's amazing. And she has this great line in that book where she's talking about like the partners of the clients that she's giving lap dances to in a strip club, and how these clients are like complaining about their wives. And so she directs the wives of these clients and she says, I want you to know that I took his money and your side every time. It just gives me the chills every time I think about that, because it's like, second wave feminists don't understand that like we actually have their back in some, in ideology at least we do, and like it's not reciprocated.
Yeah, and you're right, Juniper, to point out the fact that like not everyone can make those choices. Yes. But I also think that to claim that like sex workers never do, or that they never have any choice, or that they like, just have to do whatever clients say is also just inaccurate.
Yeah, problematic.
For sure. I mean, I think about the one client that I always think about when I think about a time that I engaged in sex work when I didn't necessarily want to. And it was for whatever reason, like the client was fine. I was fine. I just really hated sucking his dick. Like I get to say that. But like, just because I fucking hate it doesn't make it rape. And I also think about this woman that I knew in grad school, who was married at the time. And she said something like, well, I'm trading, I have sex with my husband. So in exchange for him doing chores. And it's like, if somebody wants to make that choice, if that's a fair trade to somebody, that's great. But I would much rather give a blowjob that I'm not particularly fond of, and have like $200, which is what I was charging at the time, than chores, like, to be quite honest. And we all get to make those choices. Like, what's worth it to us?
Yeah. That's so important. I actually think that's probably like...
That's a good note to end on. Yeah.
Unless there's anything else that you really want to get across before we sign off.
I think that's it.
That's pretty good. Yeah. Where can people find you and your work?
I'm on Twitter.com with all the baby commies at Juniper Fits.
And
you can get my book on the Feminist Press website, and my memoir, which will be out in the summer, is also from Feminist Press. Oh, and I'm in the same book as you, right, Jessie? We Too.
Yeah, We Too.
Yeah, so.
Mm-hmm. But thank you so much. I always love talking to you.
And this is amazing. It was wonderful to meet you.
So lovely to meet you, and thank you for the awesome questions.
Phoenix Kalita is a former sex worker turned public speaker, podcast creator, and host. Her lived experience in survival and street-based sex work as a queer Afro-Latina and survivor of sexual violence and police brutality has molded her into an outspoken advocate for anti-racism, income equality, and sex worker rights.
Welcome, Phoenix. We're really happy to have you here today.
Hi. I'm glad to be here.
Yeah. Can you introduce yourself?
Sure. So my name is Phoenix Kalita. I am rapidly attempting to adjust my microphone to get a good angle. But, I'm one of the co-executive directors of SWAP USA. I am a longtime sex worker, have done various types of sex work. Obviously, I'm Black. My hair is speaking today. I love it.
I love your hair.
I'm also just basically a political junkie and a degenerate leftist, I guess. That's what they're calling us these days.
That's actually why we wanted to have you on.
Yes.
Yeah, a degenerate leftist is exactly what we need.
Yeah.
What is that saying? It's something like, if I'm in heaven, I'll never know. But if I'm in hell, I also won't know because I'll be too busy shaking hands.
I love that.
I see my hellmates right now. The heathens have it. So
Yeah. So tell me a little bit about what you think about being a sex worker leftist, because obviously there's there's a lot of sex workers who are leftists, but there's a lot of leftists who hate sex workers. So
yeah.
Do you want to situate that a little bit?
Wow. Yeah. So
that's a whole can of worms, but we can go ahead and open that.
That's what we're here for, right?
Yeah.
No, I actually find that a lot of leftists are actually really opposed to sex workers because they have these weird infantilizing ideas of misogyny. And so they really are feeding it. It's sort of embarrassing. It's really embarrassing. But no, a lot of leftists really do fall into conservative talking points and stereotypes about sex work. And it's so you actually think you're better equipped to talk about sex work than actual sex workers? That's fucking weird, right?
Yeah.
I think that it's an especially difficult thing coming from the left because part of a lot of leftist ideology is the idea that you should have bodily autonomy, you should have personal autonomy, that you should be able to decide who you are as a person. And then all of a sudden we talk about sex work and it's but not you.
Except you.
I mean, that to me feels like the whole second wave feminist ideology too. And for me, I mean, I don't want to cut you off because I want to hear what you have to say, but I felt when the Texas abortion ban passed, I felt a little angry because there was all of these feminists who were how dare anyone tell us what to do with our bodies, and this is outrageous. And I was but weren't you just telling us what to do with our bodies? So there's some incongruency here.
I know, definitely that, but it's also I also find this logic with the anti-vaxxers with the COVID shit, where they're my body, my choice, and I was can you apply that to my vagina though?
Yeah.
Could my vagina also be a place of my choice? What the fuck? But no, that really is a thing. And it's really frustrating. And I think a lot of it is rooted in this not necessarily anti-sex work, but particularly anti-sex sort of ideals. Mm-hmm. And so and then there's also this whole but they're all being exploited and this and that. And it's but rights make people be less exploited. So why are we not fighting for rights?
Yeah,
right. And so that's probably my biggest issue with leftists when they talk about this is that they're very determined to talk about, the sort of woe is me sex workers, right? The sex workers who don't have choices. But then when I'm hey, I was homeless, right? I started getting pregnant when I was a teenager. I have a history. I'm a hoe. You know what I'm saying? But the seriousness though is I did actually, I did start getting pregnant when I was a teenager. I was a teenage mom, and sex work was the only thing that could really afford me a lifestyle that gave me the best options for my children. And, you know, I've mentioned this sometimes before, but you know, doing sex work is literally how I paid for my children's private school tuition.
Yeah.
Because like they needed like, you know, that sort of like education. And I'm like, I'm not embarrassed about it. But people always want to be like this. Oh, well, but you know, if you did sex work, it's because like you were raped as a child. Like, yeah, I was. If you're a sex worker, it's because you're crazy. Yeah, I fucking am. Like, let me tell you how long I've been in therapy for decades at this point. Like, yeah, I'm fucking crazy. Yeah. But you know what I mean? But it's always this sort of there's something like defective about you. And it's like, yeah, there is, but just because I'm defective in some ways, which I will own, and I will only speak for myself because I do not want to put this on other sex workers. Like, you know what I'm saying? Because there's so much stuff. But it's like, yeah, I am actually like defective in some ways, but I'm still trying to survive. Like, why does the fact that like I suffered abuse as a child mean that I shouldn't be able to afford to feed my children as an adult?
Yeah.
Right. And that's what I meant when I said like, you know, who cares? Because I think that like our past like shouldn't be used to like delegitimize our present.
Yeah.
Oh, definitely. I definitely agree with that. And it's really unfortunate that that is sort of like the common thing, because I was always like, well, I would never do it. And it's like, well, I'm not you, bitch.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I'm living my best life. Let me like leave me alone. Yeah. And I find that that's like a really big problem with leftists. And so like there's always this whole, and also I think that can we talk about tankies?
Yeah. Yeah. Go ahead.
I fucking hate Twitter tankies. I'm sorry for your mentions now. I'm just like preemptively apologizing.
We can talk about whatever you talk about.
They're quite rabid. But no, that really is a thing that also I find in a lot of leftists when you get into like this like weird like Marxist ideology and like this like whatever the fuck they be doing over there. I don't know. I'm not allowed to sit there. I don't really know what they be doing.
Yeah.
But I know that is a big thing, is that sex work is not seen as real work because you're not like producing a thing, right?
Yeah.
So like I find, because I'm partnered with someone who is a cis-identified male, right? And so like he's a machine operator, and so he can go to work and be like, yeah, you know, I got my wrenches and I'm doing the thing on the machine. I'm like packaging food and like whatever, and like eat these fucking granola bars, you know what I mean? But like people will see him as being a quote unquote like a real worker, when it's like I'm doing the same amount of labor, but my labor is not seen as valid because it's sex work. And I'm like, that's a problem to me, because my body is also, you know what I'm saying? Like being tested, and it's time and it's money, and you have to put up photos and ads and do your own, you know, like accounting and marketing and managing and all these sort of things. But because you're not like producing an item, right? Like I'm not making a chair, I'm not making a couch, I'm not packaging your product.
Yeah.
So it's like not real work. And it's like, but I'm working as hard as everybody else. How the fuck did this happen?
Yeah. I think to me, like, and I'm curious what you think about this. I also feel like it displays like this idea that like sex can't possibly be work, or that it's somehow dirty than other types of work, or that it's more exploitative than other types of work, runs through. But I also wonder, if there's like a misunderstanding of like, so there's obviously here like a misunderstanding of what labor is, but what about a misunderstanding of like what sex is? Because it feels like that's also woven into it, especially when, I mean, I know that I see the same conversation come up every 3 to 6 months on Twitter of like, after the revolution, there'll be no sex work. And this makes no sense to me. Like, at all.
After the revolution, there will be no joy. Shut the fuck up and go to work.
So, like, to me, that feels like very much like a misunderstanding of sex and what people are getting out of sex. And I'm curious, like, what you think about this and why anyone would assert this.
Maybe also lay the groundwork for like the revolution for those listening who might not understand what we're talking about when we say that.
Sure. So, wait, was that for me or for?
Yeah.
I don't know.
You're the expert here. We're just asking questions.
So I'm just going to be like really anti-white for a minute, and
go ahead.
I apologize because white people piss me off sometimes.
Yeah, that's fine.
So this whole like after the revolution is like, we're going to kill capitalism and have like this communist utopia and everything's going to be amazing. And there's going to be like welfare and social things and nobody has to work if they don't want to work. And that's all wonderful. Godspeed, niggas. Godspeed, my white niggas. You're never going to do this.
Right.
Mm-hmm. There will be no revolution. Let me hoe in peace, please. That's like my first.
There will be no revolution. Let me hoe in peace.
But on a serious level, what I hate about these folks is that they really are the folks I was talking about earlier, where they're obsessed with like this fetishizing workers and like you're not a real worker unless you're like making a thing and like you're in a factory and you're doing that. But it leaves us in an awkward position where they're talking about like sex work won't be here, but also like, where's your conversations around patriarchy and sexism and misogyny? Mm-hmm. Because can I just say it?
Yeah, please.
So, like, even if I'm in a world where I don't have to fuck for free because all my needs are met, men will push me and pressure me to fuck for free because misogyny exists.
Yes.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So if you want to dazzle me, razzle me, bedazzle me, whatever the fuck you're trying to do.
Bejazzle me.
Nigga, I don't know. It just has to rhyme. I don't know. No, but like seriously though, it really is a conversation around but no one will have to do sex work. So people are just going to fuck for free. And it's like, for one, I don't fuck for free. I literally, truly do not. I never will. Mm-hmm. And like, that doesn't mean that sex is only transactional, but it really does mean that like, my pussy is amazing. Like, what? Have you been in here? Oh, you didn't pay for it. But
you're like, I'm sitting on my gold mine. Why would I just give it to you?
But like, honestly, no, that is a thing though, because men, a lot of men do tend to be manipulative, right? We have even on leftist spaces, the term like brocialist, right? Like, so we know there's even like these creepy predatory dudes even in these leftist spaces. And it's like, what the fuck do I look like fucking for free and getting nothing while you're getting off and getting this nut off to my pussy, but I got nothing. Why am I even doing that? And, people will say it's not about like economic coercion, like, oh, but you'll have all your needs met, but I still don't want to fuck you.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Like you can buy me I can have a house, I can have food, I can, have my little greenhouse. I'm so obsessed with gardening. It's like a thing. But like I can have, but I still don't want to fuck you.
Right. Mm-hmm.
You're not desirable. I want about you. And so unless there's some sort of something that I'm benefiting from, because I know my pussy not going to get wet. I know I'm not getting off. So what am I fucking you for? Like, it's not even mutually enjoyable to me. So there's like this weird obsession with these leftists, but no one will have to do sex work. And it's like, but y'all aren't talking about good sex.
Yeah.
Like highly consensual sex, like getting my rocks off to this type of sex, And another thing too, is they rarely talk about things like BDSM because babe, if I'm going to have to fucking get all these ropes, fucking tie you up, put you on this, put you on that, hook your balls up to this, doing it for free.
Right. Yeah.
Like, I will happily, if ball torture is your thing, I will happily indulge you. But that is not my kink, so I'm not doing that. Right. And I feel like that also really does speak to not viewing sex work as real work, because there is real work, and not just like the marketing and the putting your ads up and the taking photos, but like literally knowing how to do things.
Yeah, no, it's a skill. Yeah.
And I think this is something like I've mentioned before on Twitter. My Twitter's so fucking messy. Oh God, I'm such a messy bitch. But no, this is actually.
I like it for that reason.
But no, I'm pretty sure this is something I've actually mentioned on Twitter, is that I have had like hardcore BDSM clients, but I also do have like a legitimate medical history background. And so I actually, like, fun fact, I used to be a CNA. I was actually in nursing school. I used to be a phlebotomist. I actually used to teach phlebotomy.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. And so like that was actually a thing. And so I did have like specific like hardcore like kink enthusiasts and BDSM clients who will come to me like, oh, I want you to do this thing, but I want you specifically to do this thing to me because I know that you have the medical expertise. If something goes wrong, you can do anything. And so it's like, but that is a skill. And like, why are you not trying to pay me for my skills? Like I'm in student debt right now. Why the fuck? Why the fuck do you want me to do this to you for free when I'm still paying student loans to learn how to get these medical degrees?
Right.
You know, and so like that's also really frustrating. Yeah. And it's like, what kind of fucking sex are you people having?
That almost makes you think that that's like a, you know how you go to college, you get your degrees, and then you go to the workforce and like, oh, well, if you had this degree, you'd be paid more. It's like, well, I have a medical background, so I can save your life if you die wrapped up in the BDSM, rope. So you should pay me a little bit more in case I have to save your life. It's like another level of value added.
It should be that way. It really is. And oddly enough, it's clients who will pay for that expertise. But meanwhile, all these like, there's no sex work after the revolution. Okay, well then you do this to this nigga for free.
I mean, I guess we went over this a little bit, like, where do you think that's like coming from, or why do you think that this like these ideas around like sex work and why sex work won't exist anymore like keep coming up like over and over and over again?
I think a lot of it has to do with like the continual conflation of sex work and sex trafficking. Mm-hmm. There's like this underlying assumption that like anybody doing sex work is like being traumatized or raped or they don't really want to do it or, like what the fuck ever. Yeah. Like all that goofy shit. But I also think a lot of it is because people really haven't examined this shit. All they do is read theory.
Yeah.
And like, there's no practical application. There's no like, how will this look in real life? Or, how do I feel about this as a person, right? Because I find very few people who really, outside of like platitudes and talking points, right? Because there's always people like, oh, well, post-revolution, I'm never going to work again. I was like, okay, but what are you going to do?
Humans, it's in our nature to need labor. Like it's in our nature to have that kind of routine or like something to work for or work towards. It's a human thing.
Yeah. And I think that's actually like a really good point in a super in-depth conversation, to be honest, about what labor looks like and what labor is. Right. Because like, I've said it for myself, like if you were in some like, post-revolution utopia, I would love nothing more than to run like a small scale farm and raise like small scale livestock and grow vegetables. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Like a lot of people are like, oh, you're just going to give vegetables to your neighbors. And I'm like, yes, I would. But also, I don't know if you know anything about gardening and raising animals. That shit is work.
It's labor.
Right.
And even though I'm not like clocking in and, clocking out or working for like a corporation like Target or Walmart or, who the fuck ever. Yeah. It is still work. And people don't really appreciate that concept. And I think that's like really unfortunate because, I have other hobbies too. Like I can sew, I can crochet, I can cook, I can food. And like canning food to me, like it's fun. I know, I'm a fucking hooker. I don't give a shit. Whatever. But no, like that was actually fun to me. But I still had to buy the materials. I still had to learn how to do it. I had to read videos and watch books. And so like, even though I'm like literally only giving you, maybe like a can of like pickles or something. Yeah. That's something that took me like months to learn how to do.
Yeah. I mean, I think about that a lot because I think about the intense stigma against like sex work, and it is a lot about just their own discomfort with sex and the fact that like we use sex to make our living because we don't care. I can't speak. Obviously I'm going to do what you did and say I can't speak for other sex workers, but like it feels to me like it's once you've been doing sex work for a while, most things in like I have I'm going to back up a little bit and say I have clients who ask me like, what's the weirdest thing that people have asked you to do? And I'm like, I don't know. I don't think anything's weird, Like,
right.
Like that question itself, like, is wrapped in this, like, sex negativity, like that there's something weird about sex or there's something weird about desires. And the longer that you spend in working in the sex industry, the less and less these things seem weird. They become like, they're just things that people desire.
Yeah, par for the course. Yeah.
You know, and so I don't even know how to answer those questions. I'm like, I don't know what's weird to you. Like, whatever you think is weird, I've been asked to do that. I don't know.
Repeatedly, and might have done it a time or two, to be honest.
Yeah, and I think that it's like, it's wrapped in this like discomfort, their own discomfort with sex as something that's like highly valued. And maybe that's it, that there's like an overvaluation of sex as if it's like so much more important or so much more powerful than other things.
There's also the aspect of like, for some reason, it's an issue when women aren't emotionally connected and impacted by sex. You know, it can't just be transactional for a woman, but for a man, that's no problem. That's very commonplace, no issue. You know, so that it's part of that too.
But yeah, actually, in regards to what you were saying, there really is like a new movement in that sort of like MRA manosphere where they're like high value men just get to cheat, and it's like, wait, what?
Yeah.
But you know, if you're a woman and you've had sex, you know, you're unmarriable, you're unfuckable, you're unwifeable. But a man, even if he's married, he just gets to cheat. He's what the fuck they say, evaluating his options.
Oh my God.
Wow.
But who are they having sex with? That's the thing that is like so wild.
No, I men tend to do, they're lying. It's like asking a man what his penis size is. They're lying. It's a lot.
Like, it's a lot. It's complicated.
Yeah, no, it really is a lot. But that really does speak to, you know, how we view sexuality and how we view pleasure. Where like it's okay for a married man to just, you know, do whatever, but a single woman can't have sex.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What? That makes sense to me.
Yeah. Yeah. So where can people find your podcast, your work, your Twitter?
I feel like we're wrapping up and I said nothing this entire
time. No, you said all the things. What?
First of all,
do you have actually, I should ask you this then. Do you have things that you want to say that you didn't say?
Or things that you're working on that you want to share?
Actually, like legitimately 100% true. Something that I am working on with Swappy. I'm with Swap USA. Love Swap. Mm-hmm. And we are working with Swap Behind Bars, one of our sister organizations. Mm-hmm. And actually something that we are trying to do is create an entire database. And so we have the web space and the domain, and I just need to do like a never-ending amount of data entry. But actually what we are trying to create is a system in which it just has like an all-encompassing sex worker resource. So like if you live in a certain state or a certain county and like you want to know if there's doctors that are sex worker friendly, we will have that for you. If you get a media request and you don't know if this reporter is like legit or not, like we will have that for you. The December 17th list, right? So that is the International Day you know, to remember sex workers, like December 17th names are going to be on there. So it really is just like trying to be like an all-encompassing site. It's so much work. It's so much work.
Yeah.
But we're doing it. And so that's actually what I'm working on. That's most of what I'm working on. Also, I'm with Swap. I do Swap shit too. Like, you know. So yeah, I'm working on that project. If you want to find me, I do actually have a podcast of my own. Me and my partner, we're like hilarious. If you've ever wanted to hear like,
listen to it.
Wait, do you actually listen to my podcast? Oh my God.
Yeah. Not every episode, but I do put it on sometimes and listen to it. I like it. And I like your partner. He's funny too.
He's so fucking hilarious. So, you know, if you ever want to hear like how like hood ass niggas talk about politics, that's what we do.
Yeah.
Awesome.
I'm literally like not even kidding. I was homeless and doing street work. This nigga used to be a Crip. His mom died from AIDS and shit. Like we both went through foster care. But we made it out clean on the other side, and now we have a podcast. You should probably listen to it.
That's awesome.
Sometimes you just need dirty, filthy leftists to.
Yeah, I love your dynamic together too. It's really fun to listen to.
But, otherwise you can always follow me on Twitter at uppity niggerous, 2 P's, 2 T's, 2 S's. But yeah, so no, definitely you can check out the podcast. You can check out my Twitter. We have winecellarmedia.com. That is a news website, and yeah, that's where you can.
Yeah, you guys do a lot.
Yeah, you're busy.
Okay, so my pet project episode.
Yes, let's recap.
Yeah, okay.
So this one's hard for me. And I was speaking to you about this even before we pressed record on this outro. I'm like, capitalism for me is difficult because there are things I like about capitalism. And this is more about my personality traits. And also, I am part of the class that, are no arguments at all. I definitely benefit from capitalism. I am a attractive white woman that comes from an educated background. I didn't have a lot of resources growing up, but I have resources now. And also the resources publicly available, they cater to me. So knowing that privilege exists in what I'm about to say, I acknowledge that entirely. But I also am someone that comes from a business background. So like the idea of competition, I love the idea of competition, and I thrive in that arena. And I build businesses. That's something I enjoy doing. I like the journey and the grind and the process of that. So when we take out the revolution, we talk about the crumble of capitalism. Part of me is like, oh man, like I can't, in the framework of what would take its place, I find it very difficult to figure out how I would personally function in that space. Yeah. And I think that's what I'm struggling with.
Yeah, I mean, I think that that's a really good point. I think for me, and I'm not a business person, so I'll just say that, like, I feel like I'm coming from a different position. I'm also a white, attractive, cis woman. And so, like, there's a way in which, like, I also benefit from that, but there's also a way in which, like, I took a different path and followed this, like, just get educated and everything will be great and do what you love and the money will come. And in our current system, like, that is absolutely not true.
No,
like,
absolutely not.
My, and maybe this is just bad decision making, but like my husband and I are in $500,000 worth of student loan debts, like something that like is just not sustainable, like at all. And for jobs that, don't pay. I mean, the entire university systems, the dream that we followed have been gutted out. Like, they're not giving full-time jobs to people anymore. They're, and so I left academia with a mountain of debt, because, the subsidies that generations before me like enjoyed were stripped by that very same generation. And so I think, I see that. And then I see a lot of, so basically I see that the like dream that I was sold,
for a substantial amount of money.
Was a lie. And, I've come into the sex industry and I can make money in the sex industry because of all the things that you're talking about. But like, that's, I don't know, but I also came from a family that was really poor, and I grew up in poverty. And so I look around and I think like this system is stacked against most people who don't fit a very, very narrow framework, or a very, very narrow identity. And so I would like to see something different. I would like to see universal health care. I think one of the things that we saw in the pandemic was giving people a universal basic income. I mean, I didn't benefit from it because I'm a sex worker, but like a lot of people did.
Yeah. That actually makes me think about like Andrew Yang was a politician I was following for a while. And then he had said, I was like, oh, I'm on board with all these things. You're really aligning with what my view of the world, I feel like the dystopia or utopia would be. And then he was anti-porn, and I was like, why'd you go there? And then, it was recent with the OnlyFans thing that just went down and got so much media attention. He came out in support of sex workers for the OnlyFans cause. And I was like, what? So anyway, here nor there. But when you talk about like universal healthcare and basic income, like I believe in those things. I think that's what it should be.
You saw like, okay, actually the government could provide a universal basic income, and the whole world didn't come crumbling down. And all that happened is that workers like finally could stand up and say like, no, actually I'm being exploited. So did Taco Bell and Walmart like close? No, they didn't. They were just forced to pay workers more money, and because nobody wanted to go there if they weren't going to pay them a living wage. Which seems fair.
Yeah, and that was a lot of the tweets and subtweets that we were seeing going around. Like, when OnlyFans were kicking off sex workers, a lot of people were like, that's because you guys lost all your waitresses and your, exploited labor force, and now you want us back. So you're going to bar this thing, which is crazy.
Yeah, and I think that, like, so, I guess it's like really complicated. I think that the system that we have now does not work for most people.
Yes.
And I think that who those people are that it works for and who it is that they don't work for is becoming like more and more and more separate. And there's more people that are falling in. I think that my grandparents' generation, in the post-war era was a generation that could totally afford a house, that could send their kids to school, that could do a bunch of things. My parents struggled more, and we're going to struggle even more. And I think that what we see is the haves having much more and the have-nots having much less. And so
what does it look like for you? Does it exist? Yeah. How does it look in your brain? Tell me about it.
I don't know. I'm not a politician, and I'm not a utopian dreamer really, but maybe I am a little bit. Maybe a little bit I am. No, I think we should have universal health care. I think we should have a universal basic income.
Agreed.
I think we should have a cap on housing prices. I think that or at least we should have wages that that go up at the level of like housing prices and education
inflation,
prices. And because I think what I'm seeing is that, and this is where a disconnect between generations is, like, I've talked to my in-laws, for example, about like, oh, well, when I graduated from college, like I got a job that wasn't making that much money, but I did this and this and this. And then when we compare like what their little income out of college was to like what the housing prices was, it's astronomically different. They're not even living in the same like universe as we're trying to operate in. And I think, especially if you're living in an expensive city, and both of us aren't living in expensive cities, but still, like,
not anymore. But I was, and it was impossible. That's why we left. And that's another thing people don't consider is like, we can see this taking place in our generations, right? Like the newer generations, like, no, I'm going to live at home till I'm 30, and no, I'm not going to get married and have kids till I'm in my 30s. Like,
and people make fun of them, but actually,
they're doing what the best possible thing they can with the cards they're dealt.
The other options are unattainable. And so I think something needs to happen. I'm not enough of a visionary to know like exactly what that is, but I do feel for, like, as a mom, I feel for my kids. I don't know. I'm pretty much resigned to the fact that I'm never going to get out of debt, and I'm just going to live with that. That bothers my husband a little bit more. He like wakes up with panic attacks, and I'm like, whatever.
That's what my mom used to tell me. She's like, if you just stay in college and like keep going to school, you'll never have to pay back your student loans. Like, I don't think that's the right way to do that.
It's not, but I don't really have any other choice, so I'm just going to go with it. I think, I don't know. Do you have that vision?
I mean, I agree with a lot of what you said. Like, I agree with universal healthcare, and also part of my family is based in Canada, so I kind of have some familiarity with how that plays out. And although it's not perfect, it's not a perfect system. It's better than what we've got right now, in my opinion. And also, given my mom spent most of her career in healthcare, so I see both sides of the insurance side and the other piece. But I think universal healthcare, I think a basic income is important. I also think I think education should be completely free. I think that's such a screw up on the U.S.'s part, because we're very far down the list of educated countries. And to just, I think it's easy to like say these things in theory, right? Like, I'm not someone who understands all the different capitalist versus socialism versus all these things. But what I will say is, like, we have evidence of what works and what doesn't work all across the world. So like, what's a common theme this season's been like, look at our history, look what has happened. It's going to repeat itself. So we can kind of avoid so many shortcomings if we use these kind of like case studies of other countries and what's working and what's not. So maybe we can use that to get closer to the utopia that benefits everyone a little bit more equally.
That's a good note to end on.
Let's end there then. Thank you for joining us on another episode of On The Horizon, a podcast about what's on the horizon for sex workers and how to navigate it.
I'm Jessie Sage, and you can find me on Twitter at sapiotextual and at jessiesage.com.
And I'm MelRose Michaels, and you can find me on social at MelRose Michaels and melrosemichaels.com.
Remember, if you want bonus footage from today's episode, you can always subscribe to us on Anchor for $9.99 a month to access all the footage we couldn't include on today's show.